Hi, folks. Welcome to Let's Talk It Over. I'm Ken Weene. With me, as always, my dear friend and co-host, Monica Brinkman, and of course, Henry, who has now become, I think, a permanent part of the show.
Yeah, he loves the show. He
And
loves you. I don't know.
I think today we're just a little bit past two horrific shootings in this country, one in Buffalo, another in Texas at a school. But I mean, there have been other shootings in the interim. I mean, those aren't the only one. And, we need, as a country, we need to be talking about guns and what they mean to us and what we need to change about how we deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
And all kinds of questions. And Monica and I have decided this is going to be a recurring topic for us. We have invited other people who would like to speak to the topic to contact us via our Facebook page or my website, which is kennethweene.com. We really want people who want to take a position and talk about it and have meaningful discourse.
Yes, it's quite important. I mean, I think almost the whole country anyway can say it's gotten out of hand.
Well,
It's
yeah,
uncontrollable.
one way or another has gotten out of hand. I was just reading about a youngster in, I think he's in Colorado, but I'm not sure, but he's a high school senior. He's young, he's advanced, he's going to be going to college next year, although he's a year younger than the others graduating. And his backpack and person have been searched like 5 times in the last 2 weeks because there is a tip line for dangerous behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, he has never had a discipline problem in school. He's on the safety committee. He's politically active. He is active in the stopping guns movement.
Yes.
But what's happening is that people are calling up about him anonymously. It's an anonymous tip line. And each time the school feels called upon to notify the authorities, they come, they search him. They've never found a gun. To the best of what I've been able to find out, he's never fired a gun, although that may be incorrect. And yet they keep rising to this bait.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they shouldn't. Okay, I understand the concern. But I think what this really speaks to is the guns have now stopped being a topic of rational behavior and rational conversation and have become part of a whole, what I call the idiom of distress, that people talk about and use guns as a way of expressing their own discomfort. In this case, perhaps their discomfort with this young man because he's so bright, because he's so political, because he stands against the norm of the group there. He also happens to be of Jewish background, and there have been some anti-Semitic attacks made on him.
Yeah.
So, but guns have become like a language, a way of expressing our discomfort as a society. And as such, we're no longer talking about guns in the reality sense as much as we're talking about the craziness of guns. Like, for example, when you look at these kids who are school shooters, and, forgetting everything else, okay, that youngster in Texas, he brought more ammunition than a U.S. Army soldier brings to a battle. The other thing is the ammunition he brought, a great deal of it were hollow points, which, like you're shooting at little kids and you're using hollow point. I mean,
Yeah.
overkill of overkill of overkill. So we're clear, it's not about, hey, I want to go kill these people. It's about my having this gun, my having these bullets, my having this extension of me that proves what about me? And that's the question we have to be asking is, what does it prove about people? Now, one of the things it proves is that I can be frightening. And I gather from the things that were said about this guy in Texas that he loved to frighten people. He was a scarer. He would go in and scare people. He would threaten people. He would torment people. Now, that's not always the case. Many of them, they're loners. They feel invisible. And they feel, hey, look at me. It's like an exhibitionist opening up his raincoat, And then there are the ones who perhaps feel helpless and put upon, the bullied, the ones who feel and not so much that they're bullied in the reality, like in the Columbine case, that those kids were not being bullied particularly, but they just weren't being seen as masculine enough. They were being put down in their minds as not being masculine. I think that's a big part of it. So one of the things is guns represent masculinity, they represent exhibitionism, they represent power, they represent being scary. They represent all of these things, especially, and again, while it certainly, the cutoffs are not clear. I mean, we know that the human brain keeps developing until 25, and then in a way it keeps developing past then because, you develop Alzheimer's or whatever. I mean, it doesn't stay.
Yeah, it's just different type.
But one of the things is this is particularly true for people who are high school age. I would say probably, I mean, they're talking now about should be 21. I'm going to say it should be 25 before people can buy guns and own guns. Unless they're under some form of supervised constraint, like the military. When you're in the military, you're not given a gun and ammo and said, okay, here you go.
Now they get trained, absolutely.
And supervised.
I think, though, Ken, I was thinking about this, and one of the problems we have is how we bring our children up, because I don't know about you, but what I was brought up on was, fathers knows best, leave it to Beaver, Disney movies, that type of thing. And I think the most that we saw guns was in the old Westerns that they would have.
I grew up around guns. We had
right. What I'm trying to say,
we had guns.
What I'm trying to say is, what do we project now? We have videos that are violent. These are what they know. They don't know Disney. We have movies that the hero is just taking these, semi-automatics and such and just mowing down people, and they're being cheered. I'm not saying that people shouldn't know about that part of life, but we seem to have way too much of that part of life and not the other.
Well, if you're saying that we have that the media are inuring young people to guns and telling them that using guns and killing people is okay, I think there's some truth to that. I'm not
saying it's totally responsible, Ken, but I'm saying I think that when I was looking back, I'm thinking, what has changed so much?
But the fact of the matter is that most kids, the vast majority of kids who are playing those games and seeing those movies, have no need to use the guns. Okay, then, one of the things we have to remember here is that the vast majority of American youth are not violent.
Correct.
Okay. The vast majority of American youth who have guns, even, I'm talking about the ones who go hunting, the ones who are shooting, are not misusing guns. We're talking about a select group of people and their path to use guns. And one of the part of the path going along with you, part of it is that with each incident, the next incident is more likely, because the person who is ready to tip into violence says, you see, that was how it worked. Especially because one of the things that you have to understand about these people who engage in this kind of violence is that they are suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
They are not planning to survive.
Yeah.
In fact, if they thought they would survive, I think they would be less likely to engage, because they know that if they did survive, they would be locked up.
Mm-hmm.
And locked up and labeled as crazy and maligned in their minds. They are making a statement. They are paying the ultimate price. They are like the monk in Vietnam who set himself on fire. They are sacrificing themselves for the cause, for the great cause. And as such, see, each time they see somebody else doing it, it's a way of saying, you see, I can do it. I can.
Mm-hmm. It's an affirmation form, yeah. One of the things that the answer so many of these states have is to arm teachers. By the time someone gets in there past the security guards, he's ready to do whatever he's going to do. And with a semi-automatic or an automatic, he's just going to do that before that teacher can even get to anything.
Well, forget about that. Look, this teacher in Texas left the door open so she could go get her cell phone. I'm sure she's feeling rather horrific now, but she didn't do something horrible. She just left the door open.
Yeah.
Do you want guns in your school? Do you want a teacher leaving a gun in her desk?
I know.
I mean, come on.
It's not the solution.
No, it's not. And it's not. And the fact of the matter is that often with some of the people, the challenge, like hardening the doors, as it were, increases the likelihood, because if I'm out to prove that I am Superman and die on this, this Viking, quasi-Viking manner, of gunfire, getting in that sealed school actually becomes more enticing to me. The real issue here is to figure out ahead of time which people are potential killers and getting them the assistance they need so that they feel valued, competent, and connected. Now, I'm going to say something here. I don't know that that's universally possible. Okay? The people who like to torment others, they're less amenable to therapy. The psychopathic person is less amenable to therapy than the alienated person, or the one who's got kind of Asperger, like the one who in Connecticut a few years back. So we have to identify, in a time when we have more and more concerns like that in our schools, we are withdrawing the financial support for the schools, particularly for school social workers, school psychologists, trained counselors, drug programs in the schools, because those counselors are really very effective, peer group counseling. Now, some schools have wonderful, wonderful resources, and the communities are investing huge amounts, but others just aren't. And when we talk about defunding the police, which is really connected here, because we saw in Texas how absolutely, the police
That was so sad. Yeah.
Pathetic. But if we took money from the police and put more money into early childhood and especially early adolescent treatment.
I wish they hadn't named it defunding. It's
well, hey, look, that's part of what happens in this country is that, especially from the right, things are constantly being renamed, and that goes back to the Nixon and Reagan years. The war on drugs, the very idea of the war on drugs. I mean, it was so set up to create this gun-oriented society. And one of the things you have to remember is, you mentioned the media, you mentioned video games and movies and stuff like that. But, in this country, we have created the army of the police. And that's part of why guns. There are far fewer guns in countries where the police are less armed.
Mm-hmm.
The bad people use fewer guns.
Right.
Okay? The more guns the police bring to the game, the more guns the bad people need.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're constantly raising the bar. And, in this country, we've gotten to the point where we have, when you talk about watching the media, you watch television and you see police wearing vests and carrying all kinds of weapons and marching in military formation. And isn't that saying the same thing? It's guns have become the language. They have become a language that people carry with them, and a destructive language.
And look at all the shows that are on now, Ken. Detective shows, I'd call them, or police shows. I mean, why are we showing all this horror all the time to everyone?
Want to see it?
Because people
want to be fair. And to be fair, a lot of them are much less about that horror. A lot of the time it's about the science, it's about stopping the bad people, etc. But, why are we as a country so preoccupied with violence is a good question.
Look at the shows on now. I mean, local stations. How many FBI shows do we need, or the new,
Well, that now you're getting another part of this whole thing. We talk about the bad guys. We all know now that J. Edgar Hoover was a monster.
Yes.
He went around spying on people. He used it for political gain. He hid his own sexuality and attacked other people's. The man was horrific.
Yes.
We know that he engaged in actually directly marketing the FBI and using television as a way of marketing the FBI to the American public. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about why do we have it, part of the reason we have it is that the very organizations that we have created to work against guns or to control guns glorify themselves. And by the way, let's talk about the NRA, which, when I was a kid, I learned to shoot in an NRA program. I was never very good, by the way. I have to tell people, but I have shot handguns, I have shot rifles, I have shot shotguns. Mm-hmm. And in all of that, it was fun. It was interesting. And I learned a lot about safety and danger and, all kinds of things.
Yeah, we would shoot at targets.
I never, ever got an encouragement from the NRA to run out and buy guns. I never was being flooded with ideas of how important it was that I have a gun. In fact, I grew up 3 miles from Prospect Park in Somerville, Massachusetts. And that was a park that marked a tower. And in that tower was where the colonists, in those days, of course, it was just farmland, and well, that's
Right.
where they kept their weapons. They kept, people in those towns. Everybody didn't have like a bunch of guns. You might have one flintlock musket over your mantelpiece in case you needed it, but that well-regulated militia was actually a militia, and it had its guns in a concentrated place. That's why the Brits went out to go to Concord and Lexington. They were going to Concord because that was a major storage depot.
Exactly. Most people don't even know that.
Yeah. So when we talk about guns, guns have become something in American. It's an American lingo. It's not English, because other English-speaking countries don't use guns the way we use guns. In fact, one of the best examples of that is Australia, where they had pretty permissive gun laws, and they had a school shooting. I think it was a school, some kind of mass shooting. And the government said, no, we're going to stop. And they stopped gun sales, and they bought back and confiscated guns.
UK did the same thing.
Nobody got crazy about it.
No.
Canada just announced, Trudeau just announced he's going to start a program to stop gun sales and get guns out of the community. And if you look at it, there's no outrage, there's no upsetment.
No.
Because, and here's the other thing, and this is a very big part of it. In those countries, the assumption is that if the majority of the people want to change the government will be changed.
Yes.
In this country, the assumption is that you and I and our votes and our political activity have no effect on government. We are not part and parcel of government. And therefore, and of course, the great lie, the last election was stolen.
Yeah.
That is feeding this belief system that we need guns. Now, reality, and then of course we have, like in Ukraine, where people are saying, see, look, they have guns so they could fight back. Bullshit. People in Ukraine who are picking up guns, those aren't guns that they've had in their homes.
No, I mean, if something would happen that we needed to defend our country, they would certainly give us arms to do so.
Absolutely. And I have no problem. First of all, I want to point out, I have no problem with adults having guns. I have no problem with children being taught about guns. I have no problem with children using guns for hunting, target shooting, etc., under proper supervision. I have no problem with people having a reasonable number of guns in their home. I own a gun. Well, actually, my wife owns it, but we have a gun in our home. I have no problem with that. I have a problem with people using guns to somehow intimidate others, show off their power, show off their masculinity, show off their sexual prowess, things like that. When the language gets distorted. Now, I also think that I have no problem whatsoever if in every community we had an armory, and in that armory were guns, and all those people who wanted to be part of a supervised local militia could be part of it, just as we were during the colonial times. Not that we're going to have to use those guns, but I have no problem if people want to have organized militias, as long as those organized militias are transparent and under political control and transparent and publicly, with public awareness and transparent. The reason I keep saying transparent is I'm not talking about a KKK. I'm not talking about a Black Panther organization. I'm not talking about something like that. I am talking about a publicly run, maintained militia that is responsive to the majority rule. Okay, and by the way, one of my greatest heroes was served in such a militia. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And he went on, and they elected him captain, I believe, and he was a terrible soldier. Really didn't know, because they didn't drill. I mean, I have no problem with people drilling. They didn't drill. So he gets out there and he has to get his men through a gate, and he has no idea how to give the commands. So he says, "Okay, guys, go through the gate and reel them on the other side."
And they did.
But I have to say, I'm a great believer in people learning about guns, having guns, understanding how guns having. Just as I'm a great believer in people owning cars and having cars and understanding how cars work and how to work on them. I'm not against that knowledge.
What is the purpose of a gun now, Ken?
I'm sorry?
What is the purpose of a gun?
Well, it's got a lot of purposes. One is for target shooting. It's a precision sport. Another is for hunting. A third is, quite honestly, for self-protection. There are bad people in the world. There are bad situations. I think that's a perfectly good one. And a fourth one is just because it's a hobby. There are lots of hobbies in this world. Why build plastic models? Why build wooden ships, little wooden ships? FDR used to love to build ships. Why?
Yeah, but you can't take the ship out and kill somebody with it.
Oh, but
they should be you should not be able to fire.
Collecting cars, then you can kill people with cars. How about flying planes? I think the question is not what the purpose of the gun is, but what is the meaning of the gun to the person who has it. Okay, in one person's hand, that particular gun is a great way to go out and kill an elk. And by the way, if you kill an elk, would you bring me some of the meat? Because I love elk. And on the other hand, in another person's hand, it's a great way to go up on a water tower and shoot at people and prove that you're somehow crazily superior until they kill you. And that proves you even more superior.
Well, all these people that want the good old days to come back, they don't realize that in the 50s, the majority of Americans wanted to make it illegal to even own a gun.
Wait a minute. What good old days? Which good old days?
In the 50s.
Oh, those were the good old days? Oh, okay.
No, this is what I'm saying. I keep hearing this from from these gun owners that, they want to get back to the old values and this type of thing.
That wasn't the 50s. The old time they're talking about.
It was after the war, after people saw so much death and destruction via guns.
I think the time they're talking about really, for the most part, never existed. But I think in their minds, it has to do, how do I put this? I do not believe that a lot of the people who say things like we want to go back to the good old days, that they really mean that. What they really mean is, and this is one of my hobby horses, as you know, Monica, they want a new age that is preparatory to the apocalypse. And when they're talking about the good old days, they're really not talking about anything in real history, because there never was a time in any country where guns were as widespread as they are now in this country. There was never a good old time when people were walking around with guns. Even here in the West, I mean, I live not too far from Tombstone.
Mhm.
The thing was, if you came into town with a gun, you had to hand it over. You weren't allowed to bring it into most of those towns. That was one of the ERP's rules in Tombstone. Yeah. That's why the gunfight took place at the OK Corral, because it was like the challenge.
Mhm.
We're not going to let the ERPs run town. We're going to run. And so the two groups met up and fought it out. But the issue was never about everybody carrying a gun. Now, I've been in places where I've been very concerned that nobody had a gun. Okay, I will tell you, you go out into the wilds of some of the particularly here in Arizona, where there are rattlesnakes and Gila monsters and mountain lions and bear, and you want to have a weapon.
Well, that's why most of the people in my area have guns, for those type of reasons, or they go hunting.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't carry guns. I'm saying it is what the gun means to the person and what the use of that gun means to the person. And my concern is that we live in a society, not that they have so much violence, although maybe we have too much violence on TV and in the social media, but that we have too much competitiveness, too much emphasis on proving we're the best, or I'm the best rather than we. This sense of superiority and striving for superiority. Who's got the most money? Who's got the biggest dick? Who's got the biggest boobs? Who's got the most money? Who's got the fastest car? Who's got the biggest house? Who's got the most money?
Well, when in the 60s, when they decided they weren't going to even be part of this materialism and decided to wear T-shirts, which were cheap, and jeans, which were cheap, what happened? The industry took it over.
Well, yeah.
The fashion industry,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Whenever those of us who are like you and myself, a little bit hippie-ish, I guess we could say a little bit more, whenever we get to a point where we're actually being heard, our message is often co-opted. Okay. Oh, well, if people want to follow my fashion lead, and I don't think you've ever seen me not wearing a T-shirt, have you? But if people wanted to follow my fashion lead, then the price of T-shirts will go up, and somehow or other, they'll put a fancy logo here or do whatever, and the price will go up and up, because we always have to be better than the next guy, better than the next person, and
and I don't feel that way at all.
Oh, well, you and I were the hippiest. We're the hippiers.
Well, you know what? I think we have tons more to talk about on this topic. I mean, we've just kind of did a little broad view today, and I'm sure we didn't hit on everything. So I invite other people to join us if they'd like, also to give us their point of view on this, because we're going to be talking more about the gun situation in the United States and, of course, other countries.
Mm-hmm. And Henry, I know that I can
say hi.
Monica is safe with you because you don't need a gun. You've got claws and teeth, and you're ready to defend her, right?
He's ready to lick me to death. With that, Ken, great discussion. I actually came in here with kind of an idea, but you've brought up some very interesting thoughts that I'm going to think about a little bit more on the topic before we discuss it again.
Okay.
So with that, we have a little something for you to enjoy, as we always do at the end of our show. Tell your friends about us, And please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Ken, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There are an estimated 270 million guns in the hands of civilians in the United States, making Americans the most heavily armed people in the world per capita. Yemen, a tribal nation with no history of strong central government or the rule of law, comes in a distant second. Most guns are in the hands of careful and law-abiding citizens, but not all. By one estimate, guns shoot more than 100,000 people a year in the U.S., when the number of homicides, suicides, and accidents were all added together. America's collective memory of the Wild West in the 1800s, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King half a century ago, is punctuated by gun violence. In fact, there were guns in America long before America was even born. Early settlers in several states were required by law to own and maintain weapons as a matter of collective defense. By the time the U.S. was established, its citizens had taken up arms not only against their Native American neighbors, but the army of their own king. The new Constitution reflected that in its Bill of Rights, declaring that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. For more than 2 centuries, that remained an important but largely overlooked guarantee, subjected to a modest series of controls. But in 2008 and 2010, landmark Supreme Court rulings gave that constitutional right sweeping new power, dramatically diminishing government authority to limit gun ownership. As legal reforms helped guns, so did one increasingly powerful lobby, the National Rifle Association. Once a relatively modest organization of gun enthusiasts and hunters, has become one of the most powerful political groups in the country. It helps elect candidates to Congress and works to overturn gun control laws in the courts. Norway is still mourning a mass murder that killed 77 people, most of them teens, proof that America is by no means unique. But America does seem to be the place the whole world thinks of when apparently ordinary people use guns for gruesome acts of violence. America stands alone in its historic and cultural attachment to guns. America stands armed. Jonathan Mann, CNN, reporting.